Chemistry is the study of matter. More importantly, it's the study of change. Now, when atoms or different types of atoms come together and combine to form molecules or compounds, something miraculously happens. The electrons will behave in really odd, weird fashion that really helps explain how a lot of things are. For example, fireworks. We all enjoy looking at fireworks. It turns out that when you light a firework and it goes right into the sky and explodes in a variety of colors, something is happening. It is not that the fireworks powder is colored with green and yellow and white and red and blue. It's because elements, the atoms, with more importantly its electrons, gets excited because it's booming out, and when it relaxes it emits this plethora of wonderful colors. Our drinks that we drink, fizzy drinks that are colored red, orange, blue, like in Gatorade and all this stuff, it's because the electrons in those atoms that forms those molecules and compounds are getting energy from the sunlight and emitting it out in the array of colors that we appreciate. Electrons also behave wonderfully when two very dangerous elements, sodium, which will explode upon contact with water, and chlorine, a toxic gas that when you breathe it in excess amounts, you will die. When these two elements come together, the electrons will rearrange to form a compound that is so safe for us to consume. Sodium and chlorine come together to form salt, sodium chloride, an entirely safe compound to consume. So, in order to understand and appreciate chemistry, you really got to go down to the subatomic level and understand what the electrons are doing, how the electrons are behaving, what the electrons are moving, how are they moving, how are they going around, rearranging itself, how is it moving from one thing to another. If you understand how the electrons behave around an atom, and how the electrons behave when they form molecules and compounds, and how they behave when it's excited, you will understand chemistry. So, here we begin our journey down and understand. First, we need to understand the electron structure of the atom. That is the basis of everything that we want to know. And then once you understand the basics, we will derive shortcuts in order to accelerate the conceptual idea without going back down and drawing all those basic things. But before we get started, I need to point out a few things for those of us that are not up to par, that atoms can have various shells, and these depend on their position on the periodic table. So, an element up in the second period will have two shells, all right? And those that are at the bottom down here will have more than two shells. Now, in actual fact, each shell is actually an energy level. That the electron will have. All right? So what it means is that each electron in a particular energy will have such and such amount of energy to it. Now, it so happens that because there are multiple shells in an atom, they could have multiple shells in an atom, the shell that is closest to the nucleus of that atom will have the lowest energy level. And the shell that is furthest away from the nucleus of an atom will have the highest energy level. And so each shell will occupy a limited amount of electrons. And it's all because of its size. All right? In the first period, the energy level is low, and the orbital for that, at that level, it's really small, and so you can only occupy up to 2 electrons. All right? In the second period, or energy level, the orbital or the shell is larger, so it can occupy 8. Now, with assumptions that I'm not going to get into, but for IGCSE, you will say that the third period or the third energy level will also can occupy up to 8 electrons. And then when it gets more than that, it gets really confusing unless you understand and study about quantum mechanical model of the atom. We're not going to go into that, but the 19th and 20th element will respectively occupy the fourth shell, and in that fourth shell, potassium, which is the 19th element, will have 1 electron, and calcium, which is the 20th element, will have 2 electrons on that fourth shell. So, now that we've talked about these things, let us learn how to draw the electron structure. And most of you have already gone down to it. You really know what's going on. Let's talk about hydrogen. It's the first element. All right? It's the first element. And it has 1 electron. Okay? So you have a nucleus, and you have an energy level, a shell. How many energy levels does hydrogen have? 1, because it's on the first period. So you would draw in the first shell, and you will count how many electrons that hydrogen has. And it has 1 electron, and so you would put that electron on the lowest energy level first. So you put it in the shell like so. All right? Now let's talk about helium. That's the second element. All right? Helium has 1 energy level because it's on the first period, but it has 2 electrons. And that first electron will be on the first shell, just like hydrogen, and then the second electron will be on that same particular shell, like so. The next element we're going to talk about is lithium. Lithium is the third element with 3 electrons. 3 electrons. Now, lithium has 2 energy levels, all right? The first 2 electrons will be at the lowest energy level because the lowest energy level can occupy 2 electrons. And then we're left with 1 more electron, the third electron, that should go to the second lowest energy level, which is up here, like so. Now, these things will go on and on and on forever. All right, so if we talk about carbon, which is the 6th element, it will have an electron structure of, he has 2 electrons in the first shell, and he has 4 electrons on the outer shell. And I will draw it like so. The reason why I'm drawing these 2 together has to do with an advanced level concept that we're not going to talk about right now. And then I'll divide the other 2 into orbitals like so. All right? Now, let's talk about some more complicated elements. Let's talk about magnesium, which is the 12th element. Magnesium has a nucleus, and it's on the 3rd period, so it has 3 energy levels. So I'm going to draw the energy levels like so. Okay, and it has 12 electrons as well. The first 2 is going to occupy the first energy level. The second one will have 8 electrons, which gives us a total of 10 electrons that's used up. And the final 2 electrons will be on the 3rd shell, like so. That's great. And finally, let's jump all the way out to argon. Okay, let's talk about argon. Argon is the 18th element. So it has 18 electrons, 3 electron shells, energy shells, right? Energy levels. And it has 18 electrons. First 2 on the first shell, the second on the second shell will have 8 electrons. And the final shell will also have 8 electrons. Now what about potassium? Potassium is the 19th element. And so it has 4 energy levels. And the 19th electron will happen to be on the outermost shell. All right? Now, some concept for you guys to understand is that, well, I'm not going to talk about it now.